A fuser. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talk and Fight and another Olympic episode featuring Christian from the Friday night panel and his ongoing series on what changes are being made and who we might expect to see at the Olympics in the boxing circle, square circle. What do you got, Christian?
More of a ring than anything else, Graham. More of a ring. At least that's the
Oh,
way
what
we
do they
like
call
to
it?
think of it.
They call it the squared circle, the circle squared or something.
Well,
I'm not kidding.
fair enough. Well, continuing on with our ongoing conversation about Olympic qualifiers and the extra importance now being placed on other tournaments as a
Yep.
pathway to the Olympic podium. We have seen some early movement in the Strandia Memorial Cup, which we mentioned yesterday. But as I mentioned, the semis aren't going to be taking place until Friday, and we're going to get into the details a little bit more later in the week. Nevertheless, a couple of notable out of the gate. I mean, it could have been guessed, and some obvious successes from some obvious corners early on. Irish boxers Kelly Harrington and Michaela Walsh both boxed their way through to the last 32. World champion Harrington recorded unanimous 5-0 victory over the Polish fighter Anita Regelska to progress in the 60 kilogram category, while the 2018 European bronze medalist Walsh went through on a split decision, beating Wilded Bertrell of Mauritius 4-1 in the 57 kilogram bout. However, former world champion Kelly Harrington was beaten in the quarterfinals today. In the quarterfinals of the lightweight division, the Dubliner lost a 4-1 split decision to Russia's Nunez Azatarian. Harrington was clearly not happy with the decision, but had little option but to accept. Even though she consistently landed scoring punches during the 3-round contest, it was the Russians' all-action style which caught the attention of the 4 judges at the end of the day, who awarded her the first 2 rounds. Harrington did win the final round on all 3 cards, it should be noted, but it wasn't enough to turn around the results at that point. The inconsistency of the judging, though, was illustrated by the fact that one of the ringside officials had marked the contest 30-27 in Harrington's favor, while the other 4 sided 29-28 with the Russian. As Harrington didn't get an opportunity to fight at the now rescheduled European qualifiers in London last March, this was the first time she was stepping into the ring in more than a year. So it's a big upset for the Irish there, Graham. But like I said, we're going to follow Stradia a little more later in the week. Moving away from Stradia for a moment and remembering that this isn't the only tournament prior to the Olympics, I came across a story this morning out of Zimbabwe, where, as a nice change of pace from what we've been talking about lately, looks like we actually found an example of the local government stepping up to actually help its athletes out, which is nice to hear. The Zimbabwe Olympic Committee has now officially come to the aid of the Zimbabwe Boxing Federation, offering to pay airfares for 3 of the boxers and 2 coaches as they travel to the final Tokyo Olympic qualifiers. So the Zimbabwean boxers' hopes of participating in the final Olympic qualifiers that were set for June in France obviously were ruined, like everyone else's, when the organizers decided to cancel that event. Local boxers that failed to secure an Olympic ticket at the African Boxing Qualification Tournament last year will now have to compete in at least 3 tournaments to score enough points to improve their rankings in hopes of getting a Tokyo berth. The Zimbabwe Boxing Federation yesterday said it was waiting for clearance from the Sports and Recreation Commission to send the boxers who had a potential to qualify for the Tokyo Olympic Games to 3 regional competitions. So Arvean Mate, the Zimbabwe Boxing Federation Secretary General, said that plans are in motion for at least 4 boxers to trade leather in Botswana, Zambia, and Mozambique before May. He was quoted as saying, "The problem we had is that one of our best boxers, you have to give me a second here on this pronunciation, Graham, Ndebelezi Piri." Again, you'll have to look this one up, guys. My apologies on the pronunciation here. He's an African flyweight champion is who he is. And he had his qualifications ruined for the Olympics and nullified when it was decided that the rankings were only going to be used from 2017 forward, which dropped him out of the top 3 position. So that means, along with some of the hopefuls that were hoping to participate, in at least now we're going to have to go through at least 3 regional tournaments before those final rankings are taken into account in May. So at least 3 they're going to have to go to on this one. So our friends in Zimbabwe aren't giving up hope just yet on Olympic glory. So we're going to have to keep an ear to the ground for follow-ups on this one as more of these regional tournaments start to crop up and take place. But at least it shows that, not everybody's given up, Graham. People are starting to think outside of the typical path, and they're trying to get their boxers to these regionals, to these continentals, to these international tournaments in hopes of getting these ranking numbers up. So we'll have to see how that goes moving forward. Obviously, things are moving along in most currently in Bulgaria, in Sofia at the Strandya tournament, and as the quarterfinals are taking place today and tomorrow. Friday, the Olympic Channel is going to be broadcasting. So if you're up first thing in the morning between 6 and 10 a.m., this is when you're going to start seeing those fights live on the Olympic Channel. So that's going to be worth checking out. And they're going to be kind of handling the semifinal coverage and obviously into the finals happening, I believe, on Saturday or Sunday. Sunday.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you with? Can you hear me, Graham?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay.
You keep stopping, and I don't know if you're stopping for me to say something or you're just catching your breath and.
Oh, you know me. If you don't go, I'm just going to keep ranting and rambling here. You know that. But yeah, I'm kind of thrilled that the rest of the boxing world is kind of starting to look away from these large qualifiers, and we're starting to see stories cropping up about these regionals and some of these smaller tournaments that we wouldn't have necessarily got the same amount of coverage or as the same amount of importance placed upon them in past years. So some added prestige.
Yep. I noted a few names. I sent them to you just for your consideration. But what was interesting about the names that I sent was the various countries that they're from, because you don't often hear of these other countries who have, let alone boxers, but an actual organization that can regulate boxing within their country. And yet they're capable of sending their fighters to the Olympics. So I sent along a few names and found it's pretty interesting that among the British female fighters, there's a Welsh fighter by the name of Mary. Oh, now I forgot her name. But anyway, it was interesting that the British really think that among all their fighters, male and female, among their top contenders for a gold is a female fighter. So anyway, just little tidbits I was catching in the news this morning. And
yeah, I saw just before we came online today. I saw that you sent a few names by, and it's we're looking at countries like Cuba. We're looking at the Uzbeks. We're looking at the Kazakhstanis, and these are countries that do have fairly well developed boxing programs. And here in North America, we don't necessarily hear as much as we might out of countries that were former Soviet republics, such as the Kazakhs, the Uzbeks, the Georgians, places like that. But these guys have long history in boxing, and a lot of that gets overshadowed because a lot of those early successes from when we really started paying attention to the numbers in boxing get attributed to the USSR and the Soviet Union, as opposed to national pride where maybe it should be placed in Uzbekistan, in Kazakhstan, in Georgia, because these guys do have incredible boxing programs and have been putting out phenomenal fighters for a long time now.
Yeah, that's what I noticed. Just the diversity of the countries that are going to be represented at the Olympics who are fighting for top tier positions, gold, silver, bronze. And I just thought it was interesting that among the British, they're counting on a woman, a young lady, to take gold. Counting on, I say, but not that it's guaranteed given the competition. So anyway, I just thought I'd send you a few names and a few countries, and it was just that more of a wow, I did not know that. But
we'll definitely take a look into it, and any new stories popping up about any of the names that you sent over, I'll keep an ear to the ground for as well.
Yeah, I mean, we generally look at the Cubans, the Americans, the Russians, maybe the Germans in general, those kinds of countries. But if you take a deeper dive into the world of Olympic boxing, you'll see how these other countries pop up as contenders going into the Olympics. How they fare at the Olympics is another story. But it is interesting to watch these, well, not the qualifiers, but now these tournaments that are going on where these other boxers are being quite prominent and victorious.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be interesting to see going forward, just as a fan watching how this plays out towards the July games in Tokyo. Mm-hmm. I'm excited. I think it's cool the way it's working out. I'm glad actually they're diffusing the qualifiers, if you will, and allowing, if you will, to release that pressure on the boxers when they go to a major event, and maybe spread out that pressure a little bit. And that's maybe where we're seeing some success from these other younger nations, or nations that we might not consider as developed, but yet have an incredible history and probably are very developed in their programming.
You can always kind of see, both sides of that argument. If this had been done based on rankings from day one, and there was no actual specific qualifying continental events going, hey, if you win this event, you're guaranteed a spot. If that had been scrapped in favor of just rankings based on, regionals, internationals, continentals, things like that, just over the last several years as a whole, and they were doing that right across the board, then it could be argued that it was more of a democratic process. And then you could really say this has been diffused. The biggest problem that we're having right now is the fact that we've had 2 successful qualifiers and 2 that are still up in the air. So at the end of the day, these extra 53 spots that are going to be allocated by ranking, someone who might be sitting in that rank going, yep, I'm guaranteed a spot right now, might decide, no, I'm just not going to fight at this Olympic qualifier for the Americas because I'm already guaranteed a spot. So it's going to change how some people are doing this. So it's not as democratic, because the people who fought in Africa, the people who fought in Asia, Oceania, that's already been decided at this point in time. Whereas now that this system's been changed halfway through, fighters in Europe and fighters in North America can take a step back and take a look at their rankings and do the math prior and go, do I really need to leave it all, in the ring? Right. At this upcoming qualifier? No, I can play it safe. I can focus on my training, on different aspects of my training, and they're kind of given at this point, I don't want to say an unfair advantage, but they're walking into this with more options ahead of them than the people fighting out of Africa or Asia, Oceania.
Right.
So moving forward next year, or as we look forward once the Olympics are done, the next big one we've mentioned a couple of times will be probably the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham 2022, July. So we'll be taking a look to see what they do with their qualification tournaments and things like that moving forward based on what happens here, because they're starting from scratch right now. We haven't had the qualification tournaments yet. So if we see that this model works, if it's applied right across the board, great. Or we're going to see if it falls on its face, if we kind of try to do this from day one. But it's the fact that it's kind of being implemented halfway through this qualification process. That's what's throwing everybody right now.
Well, keeping in mind, too, when the actual qualified boxers get to Tokyo, mm-hmm. is it then a toss of the coin as to who they're fighting first, day one? Because they have something like 5 fights within several days, which is...
Well, it's going to be dependent on where you're seated as well.
That's what I'm saying. So,
yeah.
So just because you're from Mauritius, you might end up fighting the top-ranked fellow in the world. So
the top-ranked fellow in the world could turn out to be from Mauritius one of these days.
Yes. I realize that. But you see what I'm saying? I no matter how fair it all becomes, at the end of the day, you're still going to have top-ranked fighters going against guys with either lesser experience, less training.
Well, you're always going to have the experience issue, because you do get people coming into the Olympics who are fighting, who are only, 18, 19, 20. Obviously, we talked a little bit earlier in the week, or last week, might have been, about how some of these young fighters are now being disqualified because their earlier rankings aren't going to count, as they're not taking into account youth rankings at this point in time.
Right.
But that being said, you're always going to have experience gaps. I mean, you get guys in their 30s still fighting at the Olympics, and this could be your 3rd or 4th Olympics versus, your 1st or 2nd Olympics. And part of that is going to play into things like nerves. First time you set foot in the Olympic Village, first time your first time on the Olympic stage, nerves are going to get to you. If it's your 4th Olympic tournament, the 20th time you stepped into the ring in an Olympic setting kind of thing, you're going to be a lot calmer. You're going to be a lot just more put together, a lot more focused on your tactics and things like that, as opposed to your, being dazzled by your immediate surroundings.
Right. And I think that's what's going to help balance off this Olympics because there won't be, because remember, there was a boxer that came on one of our panels and he was saying he was ready to go, but come Olympic day, he goes into the ring and he's like, uh, and the psychology of it all is how he described his loss. I mean, he was just simply in awe of what was going on around him and wasn't really focused on the fight itself and lost the fight, and thus his chance at winning a medal.
Yeah, and as well, we've heard from a couple of boxers that we've talked to that they really don't remember their fights all that well. They might remember one combination or one hit, or taking one particular hit or something like that. But the fight as a whole is mostly a blur to these guys because you're just so focused on the moment, in the moment. And you have to be, otherwise you get your bell rung pretty quickly here. So a lot of these guys come back and they say they have to watch their fights afterwards to figure out what the hell happened. How did I lose? There's no way I lost that on points. And you go back and you watch and you go, oh yeah, there it is. Oh yeah, I didn't see that one. And so the psychology of it, very much, you can get dazzled by the lights, the crowds, especially if it's a hometown versus, or if you're fighting someone from the hometown crowd kind of thing. Obviously, that's going to be less of an issue with this Olympics with no fans and those people who are spectating being asked not to scream, cheer, and sing, but rather to just clap their hands and stomp their feet, as it would be. So this, from a psychological standpoint, it's going to be a little different, these games in general, but you're always going to come across that experience gap.
So do you happen to know if there's any Olympic tournaments like the one going on in Bulgaria right now in America right now happening?
Well, nothing this week that I'm aware of. No big AIBA tournaments that I'm aware of.
Because the professionals are now going at it with crowds. Apparently, I think this weekend is the first weekend they'll have crowds in the audience at the professional level. So I'm just curious.
Well, in the U.S., depending on what state you're in, they're obviously they don't have much of a national strategy when it comes to COVID. So depending on what state different things are happening in, you're going to see either them welcoming people in with open arms into the stadiums, or you're going to see fans allowed but at limited capacity with social distancing implemented, or you're going to see like what we saw in the Tyson Pillow fight, where you've got nobody in the stands, blacked out auditorium, and just spotlights on the ring.
And that's what we're seeing most recently with professional fights, whether they're held in a casino or a rented hall. Nobody in the stands, with the exception of the people who are working at the facility or for the event. But I'm just curious whether you had noticed amateur tournaments taking place in the Americas now that obviously certain restrictions are being lifted for these professional events.
Well, I haven't seen. There's no large internationals happening at this exact moment in the U.S. or anywhere else in the Americas as we speak right now. But let me take a look into the AIBA schedule, and we'll go from there and take a look and see what's coming up, because I'm sure that we're going to be looking to see, these guys are going to be looking to get as much not only exposure but as much time in with the leather as they can.
Right.
Moving towards Tokyo at this point, because we saw world champion lose in a quarterfinal, Katie Harrington, just today, first time she's had a chance to step in the ring in a year. So and that does play not only on a psychological level, but just on a physical level, on a physical conditioning level. So we're going to be seeing fighters from all across the Americas and Europe trying to get into as many of these competitions as they can running up to it, especially those who are still hoping to improve their rankings in case they do have a poor showing at the rescheduled Americas tournament.
Yeah, I would just have to imagine that there are efforts underway to begin scheduling amateur events to warm up boxers across the Americas, as they are doing in Africa, as you pointed out, and Europe, as you pointed out. And because Asia Oceania is already taken care of, so now I'm just curious whether we can do some research and have a look at the Americas per se, because there may be some running under the radar, if you will, that are specifically set up for the amateurs that we don't hear about.
Well, that's true. We don't always hear as much as we could. We obviously hear the most about amateur sport in general every 4 years when an Olympics comes around. So, while there's lots of information being poured into the pool, now's the time to get in there and take a look around. So, I'll definitely take a look into that for you and see what we can find for the Americas for tomorrow. Then,
Yeah, thanks a lot. Was that what you had for today? I'm just curious. I interrupted and completely sent you down a different little track there.
No, that was it. Just we were talking a little bit more still, just our coverage of what's going on in Sofia right now at the Stranya tournament. And I said, a little story out of Zimbabwe today made me feel good that the government's actually stepping in and releasing funds, trying to help some amateur boxers get to some regionals in hopes of qualifying for the games.
Right on. Good stuff.
As opposed to what
All right.
happened to our friends in Nigeria, where they didn't release the funds and now they're not going to the games.
As country as big and as proud as Nigeria, given its boxing history, blows me away. What a decision.
Red tape. It went across a bureaucrat's desk, and that's all there was to it.
Anyway, West Africa. Anyway. All right. Thanks very much, Christian. Appreciate your input. And thanks very much, your good viewership, for taking the time to listen in today. Like, share, subscribe. And if you are subscribed, remember to ring that bell for notifications. And we'll see you tomorrow.
Have a good one.
Thank you.